Welcome to Happy Wolf Art and episode 7 of Artistic Choices. This week we're looking at the Berenstain Bears, specifically the big book of Berenstain Bears for beginners. Real briefly, though, I want to go through a timeline of what's in that book. So, The Big Honey Hunt is the first title, 1962. And as far as I know, it was published under the imprint that Dr. Seuss was publishing under. So the initial stories are a little bit similar in the end rhyme as far as the text goes. But this collection here is a really neat collection. I recently found it in a local bookstore, and I do have obviously the earliest Berenstain Bear story, and I have one or two others, but this collection actually brings together a few that I didn't have, and it's a nice collection. So here is the table of contents, and I also want to look obviously at the art and learn a few things from the Berenstain Bears, which is obviously an all-time favorite and great cartooning series. But if you're interested in documentaries on YouTube, there's this documentary right here, Stan and Jan Berenstein's story. And let me scan down. There's a real short one here, the 50th anniversary. Unfortunately, there's not a lot as far as documentaries, but there's this interview here from 1979. I haven't watched it yet, but it's 30 minutes, so that may be the longest one out there. And there is also a book about their life and creating this series, which is really interesting and intriguing. So artistic choices. I just want to look at a few things that they were doing in their stories and point out a couple things that I found along the way as I was reading. So this is the very first image of the first book, right? The papa and the son, they're going off on an adventure. Mama Bear is staying at home in the treehouse. If you notice this little window, this disappears after a year or two, and there starts to be windows popping up in the canopy, which is sort of interesting. But yeah, in this series, the first story, you'll notice the coloring of the Berenstain Bears, and as far as their look, it's very, it looks like pen and nib. And the color of their clothes, see, Papa Bear has this red, the son, Baby Bear, has the red shirt, and Mama Bear has this white and red apron. So that's the initial colors, and those colors do change throughout this series. They eventually do stabilize, but I'll point out a couple of those things. So let me look at my notes. I have a couple little notes here. So these early series, the boy bear, he's a little bit lankier, and as the years go on, he gets a little bit stockier and smaller. And also the depiction as far as action lines and how he's drawn becomes a little bit more dynamic. So if you look at this image, for example, it's pretty straightforward, very angular shapes, and it becomes really dynamic and quickly drawn in some of the later ones. This image here, this is also a framing image, beginning of the story, the end of the story. And the author, if you compare the details of the banisters or the windows or these little edges in between the banister rails, you can see that the artist redraws this entire scene. Even in this one, you can look at these supports for this chimney stack. They're in different spots in the final image for this story. So all right, so I'm going to flip through here to a couple more of my notes. So whenever there's an action, and this is interesting and something that I've been trying to incorporate into my own projects. But whenever there's an action, so they've come down this hill, and obviously something drastic is going on, the following page usually has a hint of it. So again, this tree and the owls, they're looking for honey in this image. Right, so something drastic happens, and then oftentimes there's a summary or a reminder of the action from the previous page, and then the eye goes off into the distance, usually following a road or a river of some sort. So here's another example. Papa Bear trying to get some honey. A porcupine comes out, and the action is continued. They're running off. Here there is no road or river or anything, but they're following this windy path of a bee. Okay, so that part is consistent. Here's a very typical sort of scene of them running down a road into the distance, and I always loved these roads going off into the distance with crisscrossing hills as a child and stuff. So that's one feature that the artist always uses. And then you'll notice after the first couple years, there's a lot of pen hatching for shading, and that gradually disappears for coloring. I believe there must be using some type of marker or paint, and you'll see that in one of the later stories. Really drastically it changes. So again, here's an action scene, and next page, recalling the adventure and what they just came from into the new adventure, a boat that goes off into the distance. Okay, so really nice storytelling forms as far as the art. And at the end of this story, again, it's framed by them coming home and returning to this scene. Really, this is almost the exact same scene. There's some width differences here. The artist could have gotten away with using the same image, but I believe it is Stan that was the initial artist, although Jan does draw, as far as I remember. He redraws this entire scene, so a lot of work. A lot of artists nowadays will just take a shortcut and reuse an image in part. So, all right, so here, if you notice, there's a change in their outfit. So Papa Bear doesn't have the red and white shirt anymore. He has the yellow shirt, and the Sun Bear, or Small Bear, he has a blue top and yellow bottoms. So Papa Bear has the yellow top, and Small Bear, or the Sun, has the yellow pants. Now that changes also in a story. Let's see, maybe in this story or the next story, perhaps by accident, I'm not sure. Eventually their colors do stabilize though. So here we have another action scene. They are leaving. If you see the action lines of the Small Bear or the Sun Bear, very, very different from that earlier image that I showed you where it was really angular, but this is far more dynamic, and this is the second story that they published. So they're working quicker, and they still have a lot of this really detailed hatching for the shading, not so much dependence on color for the shadows, but the hatching conveys the shadows. Here's a really neat scene. So they ride down this hill, or actually Papa Bear does on the bike, through this pen of animals, and then you see a continuance of that action. They're chasing them down the road. So again, this sort of trope or way of storytelling is used throughout their stories. Here you see those windows starting to show up in the canopies and disappearing from these branches. Also here you see the color has changed. Small Bear, or the Sun, has a yellow shirt. Previously he had yellow pants, but blue pants, and Papa Bear in yellow and yellow. So, and they do keep this white, red, These are almost Superman colors in a way. All right. So I'll come, let's see. Oh yeah, let me focus in on this image. I was going to come back to it. But if you look at the details in this line, you can tell that the artist is working really quickly. For example, this bar, the dress line, it goes through the bar. Here the foot should be disappearing behind the rail. And a lot of these little detailed lines are just being left on there because the artist is working quickly. And it also gives a fluid feel, just a nice and relaxed feel to the piece, not really tight. But those little details did jump out at me as something that is perhaps overlooked, or they just didn't care, because it is sort of a faster technique that's being employed here. Let's see. Other thing, as far as storytelling, you can see Mama Bear's flower here. And throughout this story, they go on various adventures trying to find a picnic spot. And that flower becomes pretty beat up throughout the story. So by the end of the story, let me find the last page. They're coming back home at the end of the adventure, right? It's drooped over and there's one petal left. So nice storytelling element there as far as art and progression. Oftentimes Papa Bear, his clothes are tattered by the end. And again here you see just a piece of the flower is left. All right, here, let's see. So between 1968 approximately and 1971, there is a pretty drastic change in style. So this is from 1971. You see the line work is very, the thick lines and less hatching. You can see right here, these really bold, thick lines. Again, some of the colors have changed. You can see some of the bleed happening here. And in this story, the shadows are really interesting. So let me find you a really drastic, here's a really drastic version of a lot of shadows. This is a night scene, but you can see that the shadows, instead of hatching, it's ink work or paint work of some level, maybe even watercolor, where previously Stan would have used hatching. And so here it's with some form of paint. And last thing I want to point out, so this is from 1978, and I would say that this is more of the modern style of the Berenstain Bears. You can see Sister Bear is here, and these very consistent, really solid, just sort of curvy lines. And this is the modern sort of, it still looks a little old compared to the really current stuff, but you can see that the style has definitely changed by the 70s and going into the 80s. It's quite a bit tighter. So anyways, if you're interested in the Berenstain Bears, this is a neat story. So if you compare the art from this version of Papa Bear to this version, quite a bit different, but it's neat to see that evolution and change over time from somebody's personal drawings and characters that they have sort of created and fall in love with, and as they progress as a professional artist. So anyways, thanks again for joining me for this episode, and appreciate any feedback, likes, and so forth. If you would like to send me any comments, my Instagram address will be in the video description. All right, thanks.